to make you small, to fit inside these narrow walls. We have built all these rooms, but you just keep expanding. We have fought so much fight, we have held on knuckles white. Well, thank God that you eclipse all our shallow understanding. Deeper than deep, brighter than bright, more than our words could ever do to describe. Truer than true, purer than pure. You're everything and still you are more. Everything and more. Everything and more. What a thrill, letting go, to admit what we don't know. Take a breath, open your hands. We are just beginning. Deeper than deep, brighter than bright, more than our words could ever do to describe. Truer than true, purer than pure. You're everything and still you are more. Everything and more. Everything and more. More than we ever thought. We couldn't dream it up. We'll spend forever with you. Won't find the edges of you. You're our eternity, infinite destiny. Go on forever with you. Won't find the edges of you. Deeper than deep, brighter than bright, more than our words could ever do to describe. Truer than true, purer than pure. You're everything and still you are more. Everything and 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 more.
In the beginning, they were. From them, there was beauty, truth, and goodness. From beauty, truth, and goodness, everything was made. From those three ingredients spring forth creation, water, land, people, personality, culture, art, technology, and each of us. The histories and myths surrounding the alchemists echo their own genesis. Like their creator before them, these humans aim to use fundamental, pure ingredients to create something wonderful. They chase three results: transmutation of common metal into gold, panacea, a perfect universal medicine, the elixir of life, granting immortality. Inevitably, their efforts failed, but their creator works toward the same purposes. Transmutation, the common transformed into the exceptional. Panacea, universal hope and healing for anyone, in any circumstance. The elixir of life, freedom from our flaws so that we may become more like the divine. We are invited to work alongside the Creator. Through God, the commoner is priest, princess, and icon. Through God, all are healed. Through God, we are given life unlimited. This is the creation.
All we care about is that people get saved. All we care about is that people get saved. About 2 years ago, my wife and I felt like it was time for us to move to Michigan, where her family is from, and we began trying to figure out what our life was going to be like here. And Before here, I was involved in something called church planting. I don't know if you know this, but churches have to start at some point, and there's some people who are trained to start churches. We call it church planting, and I was meeting with a leader of a church planting network that kind of covers this region. And he was walking with us around different parts of Michigan, and he kept saying these words to me: all we care about is that people get saved. What he meant is that we're not really worried about like the model of church or even the denomination of church. All we care about is that people get saved, that it's somehow at the core of church, at the core of the church's purpose is just that people get saved. As the day went on and we finally gathered together for a final meeting, and he kept saying this phrase, all we care about is that people get saved. And eventually I said, I'm going to need you to stop talking about my friends that way. And the meeting got a little awkward. But the challenge is that when you walk around a community and you think that the only reason a church exists is that people get saved, I say, what about the church on the corner that's been there for 100 years, that has saw this city through a depression and has fed their neighbors and has been with their neighbors, and it's been the same 45 people all of that time? What about them? Is that somehow an unfaithful version of church? Because I think sometimes what can happen in church is we develop this idea that we know God for other people. But I actually think the story is that we know God with other people. We don't know God for other people, but in fact, we know God with other people. We can see this exemplified in the life of Jesus, that the thing that Jesus keeps inviting people to is himself, relationship. Come walk with me, come sit with me, come eat with me. That there's this sense that to know the divine is to know the divine with other people. Now, I think experientially, sometimes our first experience with Jesus, it really feels like what we feel in our bodies is that, man, this God is for me. And that is absolutely true. But the reason that God is for you is because God is with you. This becomes a challenge for churches, that when we minister to people, who are the objects? The people. That when we minister to people, we make people the object of which we are doing something to. But I think the invitation of the text, the invitation of a lot of years of church history, is to look at people and discover what God is doing among us together, to walk with people. Now, it can be said that there's some wisdom here, I think, that the 5 people you spend the most time with, you become like them. You ever heard that piece of wisdom before? A lot of us think about that as we raise our kids, right? Like the 5 people they spend the most time with is who they're going to be like. I think this is also true of Jesus. That if you make intentional efforts to know Jesus, that the way of Jesus will begin to change you. It'll begin to change you. So what I'm not suggesting is that Jesus is never going to create any conflict in your life. Like, will you be changed by walking with Jesus? Yes. Will it match the desires of religion? No. Will it be difficult, humbling, sometimes exposing? Yes. Will it move at the pace that other people desire for you? No. Will it sometimes challenge the desires that you have? Yes. Will Jesus leave you if you're moving too slow? No. No. That at the core of what it means to know the divine, to have knowledge of God, is always a participating knowledge. To know God is to walk with God, to participate with God in what God is doing in the world. See, throughout the Bible, God's people have struggled with this idea that God cannot be objectified. God can only be with, that we know him through relationship. That God cannot be objectified, but that God must be shadowed or mirrored or walked with. In the earliest parts of our text, we see this as God's people are like wandering a desert, and they want a god they can objectify, and so they pull together all their gold and their silver, and they make this statue of a calf that they can kind of say, look at our God, look how beautiful this God is. God says, no, I will not be objectified. As other places are having kings that they are literally referring to as divine, God's people are like, we want a king. We want a king that represents our divinity. And God says, no, I will not be objectified. When God's people are seeking a militant leader who will conquer other nations on behalf of the divine, God says, no, I will not be objectified in a militant leader. And when Jesus is walking the earth, like the literal human Jesus, he was making a lot of religious people very angry because he was stepping outside their objectifications that they were producing for other people. This God cannot be objectified, and this becomes a really important moment, a really important understanding for the early church as Gentiles are coming to faith. See, the early church started among Jews, and their understanding of Christianity, they didn't call it Christianity back then, was that to be Christian was to be a Jesus-following Jew. So it was an extension of their Judaism. But as Gentiles, non-Jews were coming to faith, all of a sudden the objectifications that they had built around this new movement were getting blown out of the water. Like, what do we do with this? What do we do with this? And so this lesson, again, is reinforced that this God cannot be objectified. This effort to kind of get God down to some kind of controllable box or thing or item or substance is not the work of God's people. The work of God's people is to shadow this God everywhere this God is and goes and moves. This kind of problem exists in the philosophical realm too. A lot of famous philosophers have done work trying to think about the world as built as like something is either a substance, like separate from everything else, exists all in of itself, or something exists in relationship. It only exists in relationship to something else. I think the Bible actually wrestles with this philosophical problem as well. In fact, the Bible wrestles with it in the very beginning of the text. In the beginning, this Bible opens up with this creation poem. Genesis chapter 1 is a creation poem that opens up with, in the beginning, God created. In the beginning, God created. So before there was time, before there was beginning, there was something that existed before that beginning that this text is referring to as God. In the beginning, God created. The word for God here is the word Elohim. The word Elohim is plural. So a literal translation might say, in the beginning, the gods created, or the community God created. The challenge is that the Hebrew scriptures always refer to Elohim in the singular. So what is God? Substance or relationship? I think the Bible would say, yeah. God is substance. God is, yes, separate from. The stories depict this God who exists outside of the frame of time that we exist in. But then also this God who exists in relationship, in community. The poem goes on like this, that on the first day of creation, God separates the light from the dark. On the second day of creation, God is separating the skies from the waters. On the third day of creation, God is separating the vegetation from the ground. So the first half of this poem, the first 3 days of this poem is God separating all of these substances. But then the poem starts to reverse a little bit. On the fourth day of creation, God creates the sun, the moon, and the stars, which do what? Create night and day. And then God creates the birds of the sky and the fish of the sea, which go where? Into the skies and into the waters. And then on the sixth day of creation, God creates the land beasts and the man beasts. That was a joke. There's nobody. I had to let people know last service it was a joke too. Maybe I should have cut it. But God fills the earth, the vegetation, the ground, with the things that go in that place. It's as if all of creation is substance, but then in order to make it all work, God fills it with the relationship, with the network of things that make the ecosystem hold together. So is God substance or is God relationship? Yes. Yes. There's another creation story in the scriptures. This one that can be found in the New Testament in the book of John, John chapter 1. John chapter 1 opens up with the same words, trying to help people's brains go back to the Genesis narrative. In the beginning was the Word. In the beginning was the Word. What this doesn't mean is in the beginning was the Bible. The Bible came long after this book was written. But in the beginning was the Word. And the word there is this word logos. Not logos, but logos. And what John is doing here is actually referencing the reader, or probably the listener first, to some Greek philosophy, the work of Aristotle. See, Aristotle claimed that if you want to make an argument that changes people, that people will receive and be different on the other side, you need to start with logos. You need to start with kind of the truth. You need to start with this statement that you're trying to bring people over to. If you were an academic writing a paper, this would be your thesis. It was this is the true thing that I want you to know. But then Aristotle says you need to move into some kind of ethos. And ethos is about the character. I don't mean like a caricature, but your character. Like why should I listen to you? Like, why should you come to church every Sunday and listen to this random pastor who moved here from Portland talk about the Bible? Right? Hopefully, over time, there's something about my character that says, you know what? I think maybe I'll give him some room to listen. There's something about the character. But then Aristotle went on to say, if you want it to transcend people's lives, there also has to be a pathos to it. There's got to be a feeling or an imagination that is stirred up from the message that you're sharing. There's got to be a logos, an ethos, and a pathos. Now, Aristotle was a student of a man named Plato. And I think Aristotle here is building on the work of Plato. So a lot of Plato's work was around something he called the transcendence. So Plato was trying to get to the essence of maybe like a morality or the essence of virtue. Like what virtues transcend human experience, physical experience, into a spiritual experience. And Plato felt those three virtues were truth, goodness, and beauty. So John comes along with a poem. And he opens up with, in the beginning was the Word. Let me read the rest of this poem. In the beginning was the Word, the Logos. And the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. The Word was with God in the beginning, and everything came into being through the Word. And without the Word, nothing came into being. What came into being through the Word was life, and life was the light for all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness doesn't extinguish the light. So this is John's big claim, that in the beginning, like before there was time, there was something else. There was a divinity that made all of this, everything we can see and everything beyond what we can see. That's a ginormous claim. But then his poem continues. The true light that shines on all people was coming into the world, and the light was in the world, and the world came into being through the light. The world didn't recognize the light. The light came to his own people, and his own people didn't welcome him. But those who did welcome him, those who believed in his name, he authorized to become God's children, born not from blood or from human desire or passion, but born from God. And he summarizes this thought with, the Word became flesh and made his home among us. We have seen his glory, glory like that of a father's only son, full of grace and truth. So in John's argument, This is John's ethos section. What he's saying is you can believe my word, you can believe what I'm saying because Jesus is credible. Now, the early readers, early listeners would have been at most a generation removed from Jesus. Like, oh yeah, I know someone who walked with that guy. He made this world a better, their world might have been small, but he made our world a better place. That he liberated so many people and has liberated so many people. If that's the reason we should listen to your statement, John, I'm paying attention. And then he finishes his poem this way. From his fullness, we have all received grace upon grace. As the law was given through Moses, through grace and truth, through grace and truth, through ethos and logos, truth came into being through Jesus Christ. He's saying, listen, we've all experienced it. He's reaching into people's imaginations now in this experience, saying, listen, there's a whole group of us here that have experienced the grace of Jesus. So this statement I'm making has credibility in the person of Jesus, but then also has credibility in the massive amounts of people who have experienced this grace, and it has changed their life. It's given an imagination for a different world being possible. It's changed the whole way we look at the world. And he wraps up his poem saying, no one has ever seen God, God the only Son, who is at the Father's side, who has made God known. What is John saying? What John is saying is that Jesus is our logos, that Jesus is our ethos, that Jesus is our pathos, that in Jesus we can find truth, in Jesus we can find goodness, and in Jesus we can find beauty. That people live at this divine intersection. That people live at this divine intersection of spiritual and physical. That in all of creation, there is nothing else in the created world that can discern all of these things. There's no other creation in the world that can look at a given situation and say, this is good or not good. There's no other being in the world that can look at a given situation and say, there's something not right about this. This is not how the world should be. That there's no other being in all of creation that can flourish in beauty, that can experience imagination, that can even think that a different world is possible, that can even imagine that the life I live right now doesn't need to be the life I live forever. And the story of Scripture is pointing us towards this divine being that since the beginning of time has existed in relationship with other people. And then in the early church and in our church today is inviting people into relationship with other people to experience the divine being, to pursue the truth together, to pursue what is good for the world together and experience beauty in our own lives and all around us where beauty is not seen. I mean, going all the way back to the Genesis story as this poem breaks for a second and kind of zeroes in on humanity. This poem built in this framework that everything in the world is either spiritual or physical, but this poem seems to tell a different story about humanity. That in Genesis 1:27, in the center of this piece that zeroes in on humanity, it says, God created humanity in God's own image. That Elohim created humans in Elohim's own image. This community that is God has been created in the image of this same community, in the divine image of Elohim, of God, created them male and female. God created them, that is, people. Are we physical or are we spiritual? Yes. And God invites us into his creation, into shadowing him in this spiritual and this physical reality, that God is everywhere in our midst, and we are invited to be awakened to his truth, to his goodness, and to his beauty. Now, some of you are like, this pastor has gone off the rails. He's out in a field somewhere. This is so mystical. Like, where is this coming from? I've never heard the Bible like this before. If that's you, I just want to read a couple things. The book of Acts, chapter 17, Paul is preaching to a bunch of folks in Athens who are really skeptical of the Jesus movement. This is the argument Paul makes with them. Acts 17, he says, God made the nations so they would seek him, perhaps even reach out to him and find him. In fact, God isn't far away from any of us. In God, that's a statement, in God we move, we live, and we exist. He says, some of your own poets have said we are his offspring. Therefore, as God's offspring, we have no need to imagine the divine as being like gold or silver or stone or an image made by human skill or thought. God overlooks this ignorance in past times, but now directs everyone everywhere to change their hearts and their lives. In a letter to the church in Rome was experienced tremendous amounts of suffering. In a letter to the church in Rome, you can find it in your Bible in the book of Romans. In the 8th chapter, these are words from that letter. We know that the whole creation is groaning together in suffering, labor pains up until now. It's not just your suffering you're experiencing. All of creation is suffering together. That if one of us is not free, none of us are free. And it's not only the creation, we ourselves who have the Spirit as the first crop of the harvest also grown inside and wait to be adopted for our bodies to be set free. There's this longing that we all share together to be free of suffering. The church in Ephesus, who's really, really struggling with unity. They were arguing over everything. They were dividing over all sorts of things. And to the church in Ephesus, there's this letter written to these churches to be circulated among all these groups, and this is what's written in that letter. You are one body in one spirit, just as God called you in one hope. There is one Lord, one faith, one baptism, and one God and Father of all, who is over all, who is through all, and who is in all. And then one of the earliest songs we have in the church, an old hymn. A real old hymn, older than any of y'all, older than anybody you've ever known or met. In the book of Colossians, we have the first hymn perhaps ever sung by the church. Actually, in this time, it was probably chanted, like wrote. And these are the words they were chanting and singing together. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the one who is first over all creation, because all things were created by him, both in the heavens and on earth, the things that are visible and the things that are invisible. You see the spirit and physical. Whether they are thrones or powers, rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. He existed before all things, and all things are held together in him. I want to invite us into maybe a next step. If you're someone who has maybe been standing on the outside of this Jesus thing for a bit, you've just been kind of watching, checking the credibility of the whole thing, paying attention to the logos, the ethos, the pathos, and you're feeling like it might be time to lean in, to step in. There's this practice that we do here that a lot of churches do. Jesus started this practice thousands of years ago called baptism. There's nothing magical about baptism, but it's like this rite of passage. It's an entrance into a community of people pursuing God in the space that exists between them. And if you'd like to be baptized, this is the tank we use. And if you'd like to be baptized, you can come find me in the lobby, and we'll find a date at your earliest convenience to baptize you. Because we love seeing people step into the community of God to mark that moment and saying, I want to live in this changed heart, changed life, awakened reality of this God who is in and through all things, this God who's holding it all together. Can I just imagine the peace I might experience if I could just live in that flow, if I could be a part of that divine dance in my daily life? If that's you and you've been considering it and thinking about it, you don't need to wait any longer. Just let me know. We'll baptize you as soon as we can. But I want to talk to everybody else for a minute too. That as a church, that our goal as a church is that we shadow God. That we shadow God, this God that is one and this God that is community, that we shadow this God and all of the implications of that in our life. And secondly, that we would be the church. That the church is not something we create and then stand back and go, look what we did together, everybody. Look at this really nice golden calf we built. Look at this really nice tower to the sky we built. Look at this awesome service we built. Look how good we are at doing church. No, the church is something we are together. The church can only exist in relationship. We must be the church together. Actual human beings who have the agency to step back and the agency to step in. That we are choosing relationship with one another in response to this God, this Elohim that we are shadowing. And that our presence in the world would be a healing presence. That we would heal our world. Not as an object, not as like I know something they don't know, but that we would move through this world that we are so intimately connected with, that our longings would groan with all of creation for liberation and freedom for everyone. That we would shadow God, be the church, and heal our world.
Carried me and cleared my path to grace. I'm done with wearing shame. I put on righteousness. Deep down, there's love beneath the fear and pain. Deep down, it's waiting to begin again because you're good. You're good, you're good, and your kindness can take my shame. And your goodness, it will sustain. Your love, God, will follow me. All my days you've been the same as it was, you never change. To the one who ransomed me and washed away my past. I'm done with counting faults. Your joy will be my strength. Deep down, I'll see this world with brand new eyes. And I know, you're making it all new again because it's good. It's good, yeah. It's good, and your kindness take my shame. And your goodness, it will sustain. Your love, God, will follow me. And I see it everywhere. The sun that lights the day. We're in a friendly game. sets free, or rain that falls on me. It's always you, so I will keep my eyes on you. Your kindness, hey, take my share. Your goodness, it will soon stay. Your love, God, will follow me. All my days you've been the same. As it was, you never changed. And all my days you've been the same. As it was, you never changed. All right. Have a great week, everybody. We'll see you next time.